There are places in this world where time seems to pause, where the wind whispers names long forgotten, and the ground remembers every step, every sin. Hollow Creek is one such place. Nestled in the folds of mist-covered hills, this quiet town hides a history carved not in stone, but in silence. A history buried beneath layers of folklore, fear, and the unspoken truths passed from one generation to the next. Every Halloween, when the veil between worlds grows thin, the people of Hollow Creek light candles and whisper prayers, not out of tradition, but out of necessity. Because here, the dead do not rest. They remember. This story is not about ghosts in the conventional sense. It is about guilt inherited through bloodlines, about ancient pacts and the price of forgetting. It is about the weight of secrets and what happens when they are disturbed. The Dead Don't Forget is a tale of youth and recklessness, of ancestral sins and supernatural reckoning. A reminder that the past is never truly gone. It simply waits, patient and hungry, beneath our feet. Dare to follow the fog. But remember, in Hollow Creek, the dead never forget. The dead don't forget. The mist descended over Hollow Creek like a living creature, slithering between old wooden houses and cobblestone alleys. Every year, when Halloween arrived, the town transformed. Windows were adorned with flickering candles, streets were covered in dry leaves, and the elders whispered stories about those who returned. But this year, something in the air was different. Heavier, darker. In the central square, beneath the weathered statue of a weeping angel, a group of teenagers had gathered, ignoring the warnings of their elders. Among them was Lucas, the charismatic leader of the group. With an easy smile and a defiant gaze, he had convinced his friends that this Halloween would be different. "Do you really believe those old folks' tales?" Lucas laughed, his voice echoing in the mist. "Come on, tonight we're going to do something epic." Beside him, Emma crossed her arms, uneasy. Though she tried to appear skeptical, part of her felt that defying the town's traditions was tempting fate. Her grandmother had been one of the guardians of the ancestral ceremony, and Emma had grown up hearing warnings that now echoed loudly in her memory. "There are things that shouldn't be touched," Emma murmured. But Lucas was already handing out black candles and sheets of ancient parchment. Off to the side, Tomas, a boy with sunken eyes and a somber expression, watched in silence. No one knew that Tomas carried a secret. His family had been cursed for generations, bound to the Hollow Creek Cemetery in a way he didn't fully understand. The plan was simple: sneak into the cemetery before midnight and perform the rite of the emptied flame, a forbidden ritual that, according to legend, would open a portal to speak with the dead. The mist thickened, wrapping around them like a shroud. From a distance, hidden behind fogged windows, the elders of the town watched helplessly. They knew nothing good would come of this night. But in Hollow Creek, the dead don't forget. As midnight approached, the group walked silently down the dirt path leading to the old cemetery. Their flashlights barely cut through the fog, and every crunch beneath their feet sounded like a gunshot in the dark. Lucas led the way, holding up a gas lantern and wearing an arrogant grin. "We just have to follow the instructions," he said. "Draw the circle, light the candles, recite the words from the parchment, and that's it." Emma looked around, anxious. The ancient gravestones rose from the mist like broken teeth, and a cold breeze seemed to whisper warnings she didn't want to hear. "This isn't right, Lucas," she finally said. "My grandmother used to say the rite of the emptied flame wasn't a game. It was a warning. Lucas let out a laugh. A warning to keep kids in line? Please, Emma. This is our chance to make history. Tomas remained silent. Every step felt heavier. His heart pounded in his ears, and the feeling of being watched grew stronger with each meter. They arrived at the central clearing of the cemetery, where a massive, broken tombstone marked the place where, according to legend, the portal had been sealed centuries ago. Lucas crouched and began tracing a circle with white chalk, while the others placed black candles in the marked positions. When everything was ready, Lucas unfolded the parchment and began reading the ancient words aloud. His voice, trembling at first, then gaining confidence. The wind stopped. The fog closed around them like a wall. A tremor ran through the ground beneath their feet. Emma clenched her fists, resisting the urge to interrupt the ritual. Tomas, however, stepped back involuntarily, eyes wide, remembering his mother's whispered warnings on nights like this. When Lucas finished reciting, a deathly silence fell over them. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, from deep underground, came a sound, a guttural whisper, followed by the creaking of old wood and crumbling stone. The dead had heard their call. At first, they thought their imaginations were playing tricks on them. But the ground beneath their feet truly trembled, and the air had taken on a nauseating stench, like disturbed earth and rotting flesh. "What was that?" Emma whispered, her flashlight shaking in her hand. Before anyone could answer, one of the nearby gravestones cracked with a sharp snap. From the fissure emerged a skeletal hand, covered in mud and fragments of decayed fabric. Tomas stepped back in horror. "It wasn't just a story," he gasped. Figures began to emerge from the ground, clumsy, deformed. Their faces were masks of despair, mouths open in silent screams. These were no ethereal ghosts, but physical bodies, dragging themselves toward the surface with spasmodic movements. Lucas, for the first time, lost his smile. "Run!" he shouted. The group scattered in panic, dodging the hands clawing at them from the earth. Emma ran toward the cemetery gate, but the fog had grown so thick she could barely see a few feet ahead. Screams echoed in every direction. Tomas stumbled and fell face first beside an open grave. Inside, the empty eyes of a newly awakened corpse stared back at him. An ancient, broken voice whispered his name. Tomas, with a strangled cry, he got to his feet and ran, knowing they wouldn't escape easily from what they had unleashed. Meanwhile, deep in the cemetery, something far worse than mere corpses began to awaken. Something that had waited centuries, and its hunger was endless. Emma ran blindly, her breath ragged, blending with the dense fog. Behind her, the guttural sounds of the dead grew louder, closer. She caught up with Lucas, who was trying to get his bearings amid the chaos. "We need to regroup," Emma yelled. Lucas nodded, his face pale and shaken. Together, they searched for Tomas and the others, guided only by screams and instinct. In the center of the cemetery, beneath a withered oak, they found Tomas kneeling before an open grave. His lips moved in an incomprehensible whisper, as if answering a voice only he could hear. "Tomas!" Lucas called, pulling his arm. "We have to go." Tomas looked up, his eyes glassy and vacant. "We can't leave them," he whispered. They need me." A figure emerged from the grave in front of him. It wasn't just a corpse. It was a small child, its face deformed by time, reaching out a trembling hand toward Tomas. Emma shivered. "Who are they?" she asked softly. Tomas slowly pulled away, as if waking from a trance. "My family, my ancestors. They were betrayed. They want justice. A piercing scream made them turn. More dead were rising, not just from the cemetery, but from the surrounding lands. They weren't just seeking to terrify. They were after something deeper, more personal, redemption or revenge. Lucas clenched his jaw. If we want to survive this night, we have to figure out how to reverse the ritual. Emma nodded, her resolve hardening. The fog swirled around them, heavy with ancient memories and broken promises. The dead had returned, and this time, they wouldn't leave until their accounts were settled. Sheltered inside the cemetery's central mausoleum, Lucas, Emma, and Tomas tried to collect their thoughts. Outside, the whispers of the dead intensified, pounding against the stone walls with echoes that seemed to shred sanity. Emma, her flashlight aimed at the floor, faced Tomas. "What else have you been hiding from us?" she demanded, her voice tense. Tomas lowered his gaze, tormented. "My ancestors. They didn't just protect the cemetery," he admitted. "They were the ones who started the ritual centuries ago. They betrayed the dead, promised them eternal peace, but condemned them to a limbo of suffering." Lucas stepped back, incredulous. "And you knew all this time?" "Not everything," Tomas defended himself. "My mother told me fragments. I didn't understand the full scope until tonight." Emma felt a wave of anger and fear. They were trapped in the middle of an ancient war, victims of inherited guilt. "How do we reverse it?" she asked urgently. Tomas took a deep breath. "We have to find the grave of the first traitor. There's a relic buried with him, an amulet that can seal the portal again. But it won't be easy. They'll be protecting that place." A thunderous blow shook the mausoleum, and a crack split one of the walls. "They found us," Lucas whispered. With renewed panic, the three of them threw themselves into the outer darkness, knowing their only chance of survival lay underground, guarded by the very spirits they had betrayed. And the clock kept ticking toward dawn, their only hope of redemption. The night thickened like tar as Lucas, Emma, and Tomas ran toward the oldest section of the cemetery. The headstones there were barely stones anymore, eroded and covered in moss, markers of a time no one remembered. The dead followed, slow but relentless, their deformed bodies whispering promises of vengeance. Tomas led the way, guided more by instinct than knowledge. He stopped in front of a half-collapsed tomb, where a symbol carved into the rock was barely visible under the grime, a broken circle crossed by a sword. "This is it," he gasped. Without wasting time, Lucas and Emma began to clear away dirt and loose stones. Suddenly, an inhuman screech tore through the air, and a figure larger than any they had seen emerged from the fog. It wasn't just another corpse. It was the guardian of the portal, an abomination of bone, ash, and pure hatred. "Protect me while I open the grave," Tomas shouted. Lucas stepped between the creature and Tomas, wielding an improvised stake. Emma, remembering her grandmother's stories, began reciting old protection prayers, her voice steady despite the terror consuming her. The guardian charged, slamming Lucas into a headstone. Emma ran to help him up as Tomas, nails cracked and bleeding, pulled a small black stone amulet from the dirt, etched with runes. "Now!" Tomas screamed. With all his strength, he slammed the amulet to the ground, shattering it in two. A burst of bluish light engulfed the cemetery. The dead wailed in agony as their bodies crumbled into dust, dragged back into the depths. The guardian howled in fury before dissipating in a burst of black mist. When silence returned, only the three of them remained, sprawled on the ground, breathing heavily beneath a sky that was beginning to lighten. But they knew the price had been high. Their lives, their minds, would never be the same again. Dawn painted the sky red over Hollow Creek. The cemetery, covered in a thin layer of dust and ash, seemed suspended in a moment of unreal calm. Lucas, Emma, and Tomas rose slowly, their bodies aching and their souls scarred. They looked around. There was no trace of the dead, nor of the shadows that had hunted them. "Did we do it?" Lucas asked, his voice barely a whisper. Emma nodded slowly, but sadness lingered in her eyes. "At a very high price," she said. Tomas knelt beside the first trader's grave. He murmured an improvised prayer, not out of faith, but out of respect. He had come to understand that the burden of his ancestors would not disappear. He would carry it forever. As they walked away from the cemetery, they saw the first villagers stepping out of their homes, their faces confused but unharmed. Life would go on in Hollow Creek, though beneath the surface, the wounds would take time to heal. Emma stopped at the edge of the cemetery and looked back one last time. "Never again," she whispered. Lucas wrapped an arm around her shoulders, and together, with Tomas close behind, they stepped into the golden mist of morning. They had faced the darkness. They had survived. But in the heart of Hollow Creek, among twisted roots and forgotten graves, something still whispered beneath the earth, waiting for another night, another chance. Because in Hollow Creek, the dead never forget. Epilogue. Years passed, but Hollow Creek was never the same. Though facades were repaired, the town square restored, and the cemetery closed to the public, a sense of unease lingered like an invisible shadow. The town elders still whispered about that cursed night, and parents warned their children to stay away from the cemetery, especially when the fog was thick. Lucas, Emma, and Tomas continued with their lives, but not without scars. Lucas became the town's unofficial guardian, always watchful for any sign that the darkness might return. Emma dedicated her life to preserving traditions, teaching new generations to respect the dead. Tomas, marked by guilt and redemption, chose a life of isolation, silently protecting Hollow Creek from the shadows. On the coldest nights, when the mist once again embraced the streets like a whisper from the past, some swore they heard faint voices calling from the cemetery. Others, more sensitive, claimed to see vague figures moving between the graves, because in Hollow Creek, though the portal was sealed, the echo of the dead remained, waiting, remembering, never forgetting.
The village of San Bartolome rested in the valley like a handful of memories trapped between gray mountains. The ever-present fog licked the cobbled streets, covered the roofs of the old wooden houses, and devoured the orchard trees. It was a heavy fog, dense as guilt, that not only concealed the paths, but also the whispers, the secrets, and the fears. The people lived as they always had: hard work, short days, long nights. There was no hurry, no future, only the immediate present, made of harvests, prayers, and superstitions. Every house had a wooden cross hanging near the door. Every window displayed at least one lit candle when the sun went down. It was tradition, they said, though no one remembered why. Something had changed. First, the animals. A rooster vanished from the coop without leaving feathers. Then, a pair of goats, then the shepherd dogs. Next, the fields. The once fertile land cracked for no reason, and seeds wouldn't sprout, even with abundant rain. People whispered in the streets, avoided going out at dusk. Children stopped playing outside, and mothers kept them close to the fire, telling them old stories of saints and monsters. One night, Tomas the shepherd, returning from the fields, found his flock dead. There were no tracks, no signs of struggle. The bodies lay arranged in a perfect circle, as if sacrificed in a ritual. Tomas fell to his knees, praying aloud, while the fog licked his back. In the village center, in the small square where a dry fountain barely stood, Doña Matilde, the elder woman everyone respected, was seen on her knees, whispering prayers to the ground. Someone tried to help her, but she shoved them away violently. "Don't touch me," she shouted, with a voice that didn't seem her own. "The fog sees through us." That same night, the mayor, Don Ernesto, called an emergency meeting in the chapel. No one was absent. The interior of the church, lit only by candles, filled with crowded bodies and somber faces. Prayers floated in the air like broken sighs. Don Ernesto stepped up to the small altar. His usually firm face now looked like a mask of exhaustion. "We can't keep ignoring this," he said with a raspy voice. "Something walks among us, something even faith has not been able to drive away." A murmur swept through the chapel like a dark wave. "What do you propose, Ernesto?" an old man shouted from the back. "More prayers? More candles?" "I propose we seek help," Ernesto replied, standing tall. "There's a man, Father Gabriel, an exorcist, a warrior of God." At the mention of his name, several crossed themselves, others lowered their heads. "Won't it make things worse?" someone muttered and proudly asked. "Worse than watching our lands and children die?" Ernesto roared. "Worse than feeling the invisible hands brushing against us in the fog?" No one answered. The decision was made, with fear, but also with the desperate certainty that time was running out. They sent a messenger that very night. As the chapel bell rang in the cold air, Clara woke up sweating in her small room, the scream of something inhuman still echoing in her ears. 2 days from San Bartolomé, along forgotten roads under leaden skies, a black carriage drawn by a single horse advanced. On the seat, wrapped in a worn cloak, traveled Father Gabriel, the man called when faith alone was not enough. Gabriel was unlike the priests of urban churches. He didn't speak sweetly nor smiled easily. His weathered face was marked with old scars, both visible and hidden. His Bible was a battered and heavy object, and his iron crucifix had been blackened by blood and fire from past exorcisms. As the carriage moved, Gabriel mentally reviewed the signs described in Don Ernesto's letter. Dead animals, corrupted fog, shared dreams. Yes, he knew that combination. It wasn't natural. It wasn't coincidence. It was an invitation. When he arrived at the entrance of San Bartolomé, the sun was dying behind the mountains, painting the sky a sickly red. The fog embraced him immediately, as if wanting to smother him. Gabriel descended from the carriage and was received by a small group led by Don Ernesto, greeted the mayor, slightly bowing his head. Thank you for coming. We are desperate." Gabriel looked at them one by one. Haggard faces, empty eyes, children hiding behind their mother's skirts. The evil had already taken root. "Show me," he ordered simply. They took him first to the ruined fields, dead land under a soulless sky, then to the pen where the animals had been found in a circle, and finally to the forest's edge where human footprints vanished into nothingness. Gabriel picked up a handful of soil and let it fall between his fingers. The earth whispered, not with words, but with presences. "This is ancient," he murmured to himself, "older than this land, hungrier." The villagers watched him work in silence, driving blessed wooden stakes into the ground, leaving improvised crosses along the paths. When he finished, he went to the chapel. There, before the altar, Gabriel opened his Bible, not to pray, but to consult the markings he'd made over the years, symbols, protection spells, sealing rituals. He knew he wasn't alone. In the church's shadows, darkness swirled like invisible smoke. He felt its gaze, its silent mockery. Gabriel lit a circle of candles, took out his crucifix and a small bottle of holy water. The first confrontation was always silent, a declaration of war. He recited the first exorcism prayers, not against possession, but against the very corruption of the place. The chapel creaked. The fog battered the stained glass windows like invisible waves. A shadow slipped between the pews, but Gabriel did not flinch. When he finished, the chapel was bathed in a strange light, not bright, but steady, a sign that, for now, faith had earned a brief respite. That same night, as he reviewed his notes by candlelight, someone knocked on the door. It was Clara, pale and desperate, barely lit by the lantern she held, was the living reflection of terror. "Father," she whispered, "I have to tell you something. Something about the forest, and about me." Gabriel gestured for her to come in, and together they sat on the front pews. Clara spoke through tears, broken, confessing the dreams, the burning pendant, the feeling of being watched from inside her own mind. As he listened, Gabriel felt the pieces fall into place in the darkest way possible. Clara wasn't just a victim. She was the link. "Your blood," Gabriel said, slamming his Bible shut. "Your blood is the key." Outside, the fog swirled unnaturally. The battle had only just begun. The house, where Clara had spent her childhood, looked different that afternoon. Colder, smaller, as if time itself had begun to corrode it from within. The windows, covered in dust, barely let in the grayish daylight. On the walls hung old portraits, stern faces, eyes that seemed to follow every movement. Clara's mother, Elena, greeted them with a fearful gesture. "Are you sure you want to stir up the past?" she asked her daughter in a low voice. Clara nodded. There was no turning back. Guided by an instinct older than reason, she climbed the stairs to the attic. Gabriel followed her, his crucifix shining under the dim glow of his flashlight. The attic was a cemetery of memories, forgotten dolls, broken suitcases, trunks locked with rusty padlocks. But Clara knew where she had to go. She stopped in front of a trapdoor under a threadbare rug, Her grandmother had always told her never to open it. "Here," she whispered. Gabriel helped lift the trapdoor. An ancient, damp stench invaded the air. Beneath was a small compartment where rested a black wooden chest, covered in carved symbols that seemed to move under the flashlight. The priest paled. "These are signs of binding and penance," he murmured. "They didn't just lock something away. They punished it." Clara knelt beside the chest. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She extended a trembling hand, and upon touching it, images exploded in her mind. A new moon night. Men and women from the village gathered around a circle of stones. A crying child. Knives gleaming under the moon. A portal opening in the air like a festering wound. Clara pulled back, gasping. "It was real," she shouted. "The pact was real." Gabriel placed a firm hand on her shoulder. "And its echo still resonates through you." With effort, they opened the chest. Inside, they found a diary, a broken chain, and a black stone that seemed to absorb the light. Gabriel took the diary. Its pages, though ancient, seemed freshly written. They narrated the original ritual, the hunger, the desperation, the unthinkable decision to summon something that promised to save them, in exchange for something more valuable than life. The blood of their descendants. Clara trembled. Everything she had felt her whole life. The weight, the fear, the sensation of being watched, now made terrifying sense. Suddenly, a dull thud echoed from the floor below. Another. And another. Gabriel stood up with a start, unsheathing a small silver knife. Clara pressed against him. The thud turned into shuffling footsteps. Something was climbing the stairs, slow but relentless. "Inside the circle," Gabriel ordered, quickly drawing a protective seal on the floor. Clara obeyed, trembling. The attic door burst open, slamming against the wall. A dark figure stood silhouetted in the doorway, tall, hunched, with arms too long and a head tilted at an unnatural angle. Its eyes glowed like burning coals. Clara's heart pounded in her chest. The pendant burned against her skin, as if fighting to protect her. Gabriel raised his crucifix and began to recite sacred verses aloud. The creature screeched, a sound not of this world, and lunged at them, but was repelled by the circle of light as if it had hit an invisible wall. The figure roared, writhing, before vanishing into the mist that had begun to seep through the cracks in the ceiling. When silence returned, Clara fell to her knees, exhausted. Gabriel knelt beside her. "This is only the beginning," he said, his voice heavy with sorrow. "They will come for you, Clara, because you are the last piece." She looked up, tears in her eyes. "Then, I won't run," she whispered. "Not this time." Gabriel offered his hand. Clara took it, sealing an alliance that was not just of faith, but of survival. The wind had risen that night, howling through the dry branches like a chorus of lamentations. San Bartolomé slept, but the forest did not. After the attack in the attic, Gabriel and Clara knew they couldn't stay idle. The diary found in the chest didn't just recount the story of the pact. It spoke of a hidden place in the forest where the original ritual had been performed. A place where the wounds of the world remained open. "We must find it," said Gabriel as he packed his bag. Crucifixes, holy water, consecrated salt, the diary. "Tonight?" asked Clara, swallowing hard. Gabriel nodded. "The longer we wait, the stronger it becomes." Armed only with flashlights and their faith, they ventured into the forest. Each step took them farther from the safety of the village, plunging them into a darkness so dense it seemed to breathe. The mist coiled around their ankles like cold fingers. Twigs cracked beneath their feet. In the air lingered the scent of wet earth and something else, something rancid, rotten. "Here," Clara whispered suddenly, stopping in front of a clearing hidden by brambles and weeds. Her memories guided her, or perhaps it was something else. Gabriel, cautious, muttered a short prayer before stepping forward. The clearing was marked by a circle of black stones covered in moss. In the center, the earth was cracked like an old wound. Something had been buried there, or something was trying to come out. Clara, as if in a trance, knelt and began to dig through the dirt. Her fingers found something hard, a fragment of stone carved with the same symbols as the chest. Gabriel helped, and soon they uncovered a stone slab, like the entrance to a tomb. "Are you sure?" he asked. She nodded, her eyes lit with a newfound determination. Together they pushed the slab aside. A fetid warm air emerged, forcing them to cover their mouths and noses. Beneath the slab was a stone staircase descending into the bowels of the earth. "This is the threshold," Gabriel murmured, "the heart of the pact." Before they could descend, Clara staggered, seized by a brutal vision. Hooded men, a stone altar drenched in blood.
A child's cry, and the immense figure of the Lord of the Threshold, rising through cracks of shadow. The vision left her breathless. Gabriel held her steady. "Clara, hold on, it's just an illusion." "No," she gasped. "It's not an illusion. It's a memory from my blood." Gabriel helped her regain her footing. They knew they couldn't face what was below unprepared. Not yet. They retraced their steps, but something followed them from the clearing. They didn't see it, but they felt it. An ancient, furious, patient presence. When they reached the edge of the forest, Clara stopped and looked back. There in the mist, two red eyes watched them. They didn't attack, not yet. They just watched, waiting. Gabriel placed a hand on her shoulder. "We've awakened it, Clara," he said softly. "Now it will come for us." She nodded, not like a frightened child, but like someone who had accepted her fate. As the mist closed behind them, they knew that the next time they returned to the clearing, it would be to face it, or to die trying. The last vigil fell over San Bartolome like a leaden shroud. The villagers shut doors and windows, sealing their homes with makeshift crosses and prayers they could barely whisper. There was no music, no laughter, only the sound of locks and the distant moan of the wind. In the chapel, Gabriel laid everything they had across the altar. Blessed candles, protection circles drawn in salt, consecrated oil, a silver dagger found beside the sealed chest, the diary of ancient sins, open to the last page, where the words seemed to bleed ink. Clara stood beside him, the weight of the world on her shoulders. Something had changed inside her the night before. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was responsibility. It was fury. "I'll teach you to invoke true protection," Gabriel said. "Not magic. Faith." They spent hours practicing. Prayers, symbols, precise movements. Gabriel drew a cross on her forehead with holy oil, marking her as a warrior of the light. Meanwhile, in the forest, the mist thickened in denser and denser spirals. Far off, whispers could be heard, and something else. A dull drumming, like war drums beneath the earth. The Lord of the Threshold would not sleep that night. As night fell, Gabriel gathered the small group of villagers who still had the strength to fight. "Tonight we face the legacy of our ancestors," he said, his voice like thunder. "We cannot win alone. But if we endure, if we show true faith, we may yet save our souls and this village." Some wept silently. Others, with hardened faces, nodded. Clara noticed that even in the depths of fear, a spark of hope shone in their eyes. They prepared offerings, stakes of blessed wood, makeshift shields with sacred symbols, small amulets crafted by the village grandmothers. A chapel became an improvised training ground. In private, Gabriel taught Clara one final lesson: the closing chant, a forgotten prayer that could only be spoken by someone with blood tied to the original pact. "What if I fail?" Clara asked, clutching the pendant in her fist. Gabriel looked at her gravely. "You won't fail. Not if you remember who you are." That night, when the chapel clock struck midnight, Clara donned a white robe, symbol of purity and sacrifice. Gabriel handed her the silver dagger and the pendant. "This is your shield and your sword." The villagers gathered silently in the courtyard, forming a circle. They prayed together, as they hadn't done in generations. The mist came first, advancing like a silent army. Then came the distortions, shadows walking among them, voices of the dead calling to the living, whispers promising redemption and damnation. Gabriel blessed the entire group. Then he took Clara's hand. "It's time," he said. They walked together into the forest. The procession moved like a faint line of fire, their lanterns trembling in the living dark. Every step betrayed the instinct to run. But they couldn't run. Evil doesn't fade on its own. It must be faced. It must be torn out by the root. And that night, Clara would be the sword that decided the fate of them all. The forest received them like a living beast. The mist closed in around them, whispering ancient secrets, coating the ground with invisible fingers, trying to hold them back. Clara walked at the front, the pendant burning against her chest, the silver dagger at her belt. Gabriel followed close behind, Bible open, his voice steady in constant prayer. The clearing where it all began emerged from the darkness, a perfect circle of barren earth, surrounded by moss-covered black stones. There, the air was different, heavier, older. The ground itself seemed to pulse beneath their feet. Gabriel sprinkled holy water around the edge of the clearing. Clara, following the instructions she'd learned, drew protective symbols with the sacred salt. "Don't break the circle," no matter what happens, Gabriel warned. She nodded, her green eyes burning with newfound resolve. Suddenly, a low, guttural growl echoed from the depths of the forest, and the shadows began to move. They emerged from the trees, twisted figures, some with familiar faces. Villagers who had disappeared months ago, now with hollow eyes and mouths twisted into macabre smiles. The lost. They were the first wave. They rushed toward the circle, shrieking, groaning, begging, and cursing all at once. Gabriel recited the exorcism aloud. Clara, standing at the center, began to sing the closing chant, a melody that seemed to come not from her lips, but from the depths of the earth itself. Each word was a heartbeat of light, each note a stab into the darkness. The lost collided with the circle's edge and burst into black dust, screaming forbidden names. But then the ground shook. From the heart of the clearing, a crack split open, and from it rose a figure, a shifting mass of liquid darkness, with shapes of wings, claws, and human faces that cried and laughed at once. Its eyes were bottomless pits, and its voice was a chorus of dead children. "Daughter of betrayal," it whispered, "come to me. The village condemned you. Your blood is mine." Clara felt her body being pulled toward that sweet, venomous voice. Visions overwhelmed her mother crying, her grandmother praying as she signed the pact in blood, Gabriel dying alone in a forgotten church. "Resist," Gabriel shouted, throwing his cross at the creature. The impact burst into light, making the demon stagger. Clara, her whole body trembling, raised the silver dagger. She remembered Gabriel's words. She remembered her mother's eyes. She remembered she was not a victim. She was the end of the chain. Screaming, Clara made a small cut in her palm and let her blood fall into the open crack. The entire clearing lit up as if a sun had awakened underground. The Lord of the Threshold roared, stretching shadowy tentacles toward her. Gabriel jumped in front of Clara, shielding her as he recited the final words of the exorcism. Clara dropped to her knees, driving the dagger into the center of the circle. A second of absolute silence. And then, the world exploded. Light devoured the darkness like fire consuming parchment. The lost screamed one last time before dissolving into ashes. The Lord of the Threshold shattered into 1,000 pieces of shadow that burned in the air. The crack closed with a thunderous thud, like the final heartbeat of a condemned soul. Gabriel collapsed to his knees, exhausted. Clara, covered in dust and blood, rose on shaky legs. In the forest, the wind shifted. The mist dispersed. For the first time in generations, the stars shone over San Bartolome. Clara looked at her blood and ash-stained hands. She had broken the cycle. She had saved her village. But a part of her knew the price would forever pulse within her blood. Gabriel approached and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You didn't fail," he said with a tired smile. Clara closed her eyes and for a moment felt peace. The dawn over San Bartolome was pale but real. For the first time in months, the sky was not a slab of clouds, but a veil of timid, fragile blue. The villagers slowly emerged from their homes, like animals sniffing the air after a storm. There were tears. There were embraces. There was silence. The square, the dry fountain, the broken paths, all still there, but something unseen had changed. A wound had been closed. In the chapel, Father Gabriel quietly dressed his wounds. Every movement hurt, but the pain was welcome. It was proof that he was still fighting, still breathing, still believing. Clara sat on one of the wooden pews, the silver pendant, now dim, hanging from her neck. Her gaze was no longer that of a child. It was the gaze of someone who had seen the abyss and come back. "Is it really over?" she asked in a soft voice. Gabriel gave her a faint, weary smile. "For now," he replied. "Evil never dies. It only sleeps." Clara nodded. She already knew that. In the days that followed, she helped rebuild the village. Every repaired house, every resown field was a small act of faith. The name of the Lord of the Threshold was never spoken again. The circle of stones in the forest was sealed beneath layers of salt and prayer. One morning, Gabriel departed in silence. He mounted his old horse and rode off toward the horizon, to other villages, other invisible battles. Before leaving, he left Clara a note, written with a steady hand. Darkness always returns, but as long as even one remembers the light, it will never win. Gabriel. Clara kept that note alongside her family's diary. She knew her role wasn't over. She became the new protector of San Bartolome, the silent watchwoman on misty nights, the heir of sacrifice and of hope. Years passed. Children laughed again in the streets. The fountain flowed with clear water once more. But on the coldest nights, when the mist rolled thick from the forest, some still claimed to see shadows moving among the trees. And some swore they heard, in the wind, a whisper that wasn't entirely human. Because evil never dies. It only sleeps. It only waits. And deep within the earth, the ritual of darkness still beats. Very, very slowly.
The fog fell thick over San Elias like a curtain of ancient tears, veiling the outlines of houses and leaving only the faint glow of rusty street lamps visible along the cobbled streets. Every stone, every twisted tree seemed to whisper secrets to those who dared to listen. That night, the wind carried the scent of wet earth and something else. A foul, barely perceptible trace that chilled the blood. Mateo Cruz walked briskly, clutching the books he had taken from the old municipal library. His footsteps echoed in the solitude of dusk, accompanied by the crackling of branches breaking under invisible steps. It was his first week in San Elias, and though he tried to rationalize every sound, every strange shadow, an ever-growing unease had settled in his chest. When he arrived at his modest home on the edge of the forest, something at the threshold stopped him cold. The mutilated corpse of a fox laid out within a circle of black stones. On its bloodied fur were symbols drawn with a dark pigment, twisted and foreign to any logic Mateo knew. "What the hell?" he whispered, swallowing hard. That same night, Mateo called the only two friends he had made in town, Elena Morales and Javier Salinas. Elena, with dark hair and a distant gaze, had lived in San Elias her entire life, though she rarely spoke of her past. Javier, on the other hand, was a former seminarian, a student of ancient scriptures who had returned to care for his ailing mother. When they arrived, Elena knelt beside the dead fox, her fingers trembling slightly as they brushed the symbols. "This isn't new," she murmured, avoiding Mateo's eyes. This has happened before. Matteo frowned. No way! There has to be an explanation. Some sick prankster, maybe a pagan rite by bored teens. Javier, however, stepped closer, his face pale and brow furrowed. They're not pranksters, they're warnings. That night, as the fog thickened and house lights dimmed one by one, the three friends gathered in Matteo's kitchen. On the table, they spread out old books and scattered notes. Javier flipped through a dusty volume on religious symbolism. This, he said, pointing to an image nearly identical to the one found on the animal, is a banishment sigil. It was used to seal fallen entities. Matteo let out a nervous laugh. Come on, Javier, you don't really believe in that stuff. I believe in what I see, Javier replied gravely. And this is just the beginning. From deep within the forest came the sound of something breaking, not the natural crackle of wind-blown branches, but something heavier, something walking. Elena quickly shut the window. Matteo tried to laugh again, but the sound died in his throat. San Elias whispered, and without knowing it, they had just heard the first call. At dawn, the town of San Elias seemed to have forgotten the horrors of the previous night. Residents opened their doors, swept their sidewalks, and greeted each other with tense smiles, clinging to routine so as not to fall into the lurking madness. Matteo, Elena, and Javier met in the town square, next to the cracked fountain where, according to the elders, St. Michael had once defeated a demon centuries ago. The air was heavy with moisture, and the sun's rays barely managed to pierce the lingering fog. We need to go to the church, Javier said firmly. Something is hidden there. Something that doesn't want to be found. Matteo scoffed, crossing his arms. Right. And I suppose we'll find ghosts and portals to hell too? Elena said nothing. She simply stared at the dark silhouette of St. Michael's Church, standing out against the leaden sky. A stab of forgotten memories pierced her mind. A damp crypt chanting in an unknown tongue, eyes glowing in the dark. Driven by a need for answers, they crossed the square and climbed the slick stone steps to the main entrance. The wooden doors, carved with scenes of the celestial battle, creaked ominously as they opened. Inside, the church was a maze of shadows and echoes. The light from the stained glass windows, pale and distorted, cast multicolored patches on the dusty pews. An elderly man in a black cassock approached them. Father Salvador, Javier whispered. I didn't know there was a new priest. The old man smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. Faith always needs its guardians, he rasped. Welcome to the Lord's house. Matteo exchanged a skeptical glance with Elena. Something about the man sent a chill down his spine, a sense of danger lurking behind the priest's kindly facade. We'd like to see the old archives, Javier said. Documents about the town's founders, records of anomalies. Father Salvador hesitated for a moment, then slowly nodded. San Elias has known trials and tribulations. But remember, some doors once opened cannot be closed. He led them to a back room where rickety shelves towered to the ceiling, packed with dust-covered tomes. As the priest withdrew, Javier dove into the books eagerly. Here it is, he murmured, pulling out a cracked leather-bound volume. The Last Judgment of San Elias. Matteo flipped through the pages, his skepticism wavering at the accounts of rebel angels, blood-sealed pacts, and a cult devoted to the fallen children of the heavens. Suddenly, Elena stopped in front of a deteriorated painting on the wall. A depiction of the Archangel Michael, battling grotesque figures falling from the sky, their faces hidden beneath veils of shadow. A nearly erased phrase ran along the frame. And he who breaks the seal shall unleash the wrath of the forgotten. A chill ran down Elena's spine. From the far end of the church, a sharp sound echoed, like an unseen force slamming a door shut. And in that instant, They knew they were not alone. Night fell over San Elias like a shroud, smothering the town in unnatural silence. Elena walked alone through the deserted streets, unable to shake the image of the painting from her mind. Every shadow seemed to move. Every dark corner whispered her name. When she arrived at her house, she found the door ajar. Her heart skipped a beat. Cautiously, she pushed it open and stepped inside. Everything was just as she had left it, except for one detail. On the dining table was an old framed photograph she didn't remember placing there. She approached and looked at it closely. It was a black and white image of a group of people standing in front of the church many years ago. In the center was a little girl, blindfolded. A tremor passed through her as she recognized something familiar in the child. It was her. A soft murmur, almost imperceptible, rose from the walls. Words in an unknown language filled the room. Elena backed away until she hit the door. "Stop!" she shouted, and the echo of her voice seemed to silence the whispers. She grabbed the photo and ran to Mateo's house, banging frantically on the door until he opened it, startled. "What's going on?" he asked. Breathless, she showed him the picture. Mateo frowned. "This doesn't make sense. You look 5 or 6 years old here." "I don't remember any of this," Elena whispered. "But something is forcing me to remember." Javier arrived shortly after, summoned urgently. He examined the photograph and went pale. "It's an initiation ceremony," he said quietly. "A forbidden ritual. The cult sealed a vow of silence with the children." Mateo closed his eyes, trying to rationalize. This could be anything. A fake, a sick joke. But Elena shook her head. "I was there. I know it. I feel it in every fiber of my being." A tremor passed through the house and rattled the windows. Outside, the fog began to swirl, as if something invisible was walking through it. Javier crossed himself. "They've awakened, and they're looking for us." From the thick mist, 3 hooded figures watched the house, motionless as statues. And though their faces were hidden, all 3 friends knew they were smiling. The next morning dawned gray and heavy, as if the sky itself was warning of the evil brewing beneath it. The entire town seemed wrapped in a strange lethargy. Empty streets, shuttered shops, windows hidden behind opaque curtains. Mateo, Elena, and Javier gathered once more, this time in the abandoned cafe across from the plaza. Javier laid several old books and documents on the table, texts he had recovered from the church archives. San Elias wasn't always a town, he explained in a hushed tone. Originally, it was a settlement founded by religious exiles who believed in the redemption of fallen angels. They wanted to open a new heaven. Mateo clenched his fists. "That's fanaticism, madness." Javier ignored him. The cult never truly vanished. It just went underground, waiting for the right time to act. Meanwhile, Elena stared out the window. She watched the townspeople, now transformed, expressionless faces, synchronized steps, murmured words in an unrecognizable tongue, drifting through the air like smoke. "Look at their eyes," she whispered. "They're not here." A shiver ran through all 3. They realized the cult had begun taking control of the minds and bodies of the townsfolk. That same night, under the veil of perpetual fog, they saw dozens of hooded figures marching in procession toward the church. They sang in a forgotten language, their voices intertwining in a somber melody that made the very air vibrate. Mateo felt a primal fear, something that neither his logic nor skepticism could soothe. "We have to stop them," said Elena, her voice firm, surprising the other 2. "How?" Mateo asked, his voice cracking. Javier pulled an old reliquary from his pocket, adorned with protective symbols. "We're not completely defenseless, but we have to move quickly. If they finish the ritual, we won't just lose the town, we'll lose our souls." From a distance, the sound of an ancient horn echoed, resonating deep within the heart of San Elias. The awakening had begun. The night was at its darkest when Mateo, Elena, and Javier slipped into St. Michael's Church, evading the hooded figures standing guard outside. The old side door gave way with a barely audible creak. Inside, the air was suffocating, heavy with stale incense and the ghostly echo of extinguished chants. Guided by Javier, who vaguely recalled a hidden passage mentioned in the ancient texts, they made their way to the main altar. There, after sliding aside a heavy stone slab, they found a narrow opening spiraling down into the earth. "There's no turning back," Javier murmured, lighting an oil lamp. One by one, they descended the icy, slippery stairs, entering a world of shadows and whispers. The air was thick, saturated with moisture, and something else. Something rancid, like centuries-old decay. The catacombs sprawled into a labyrinth of narrow corridors and hidden chambers. On the walls, ancient carvings told stories of angels falling, of blood-bound pacts, of divine betrayals. At the heart of a larger chamber, they found what they were looking for, a grimoire chained to a pedestal of obsidian. The book pulsed as if it had a heart of its own. "This is the source of their power," Javier said, reverently, yet with fear. "If we destroy it, we can weaken the cult." Mateo stepped forward hesitantly. A voice, sweet, seductive, whispered in his mind, promising knowledge, unlimited power. He staggered back, trembling. "It's alive," Elena whispered, wide-eyed. Before they could decide what to do, a hooded figure emerged from the shadows. It was no longer human, its face a melted mask of flesh, its eyes two pits of nothingness. "Intruders!" the creature shrieked. With quick reflexes, Javier hurled consecrated salt at the creature. It screamed and recoiled, dissolving into black smoke. "We have to hurry," Javier shouted. "We're not alone down here." Gripped by fresh terror, the three friends prepared to destroy the grimoire, while the shadows around them began to stir. Drawing closer, chaos erupted in San Elias that very night. While Mateo, Elena, and Javier battled in the depths, above ground, the cult had taken full control of the town. Unnatural lights flashed from the church tower, painting the sky in impossible colors. Inhuman voices chanted ancient hymns, and the streets filled with disfigured figures, twisted blends of humans and shadows. From behind shuttered windows, a few remaining townspeople watched in terror, powerless to intervene. The ground trembled beneath them, and the air reeked of ozone and scorched flesh. Mateo, Elena, and Javier managed to escape the catacombs, but their victory was short-lived. Outside, they were surrounded by cultists, led by a towering figure, Isaac, the former priest, long thought dead. Isaac grinned with a grotesque sneer. "Children of doubt," he boomed, his voice echoing like thunder. "Come witness the rebirth." With a wave of his hand, his followers attacked. Mateo fought with raw desperation, striking and dodging as best he could. Javier, wielding his reliquary and consecrated salt, held several cultists at bay. Elena, driven by sheer survival instinct, bolted toward the church, searching for anything that might give them an advantage. Inside, she found the corrupted altar, where the grimoire had been moved. A circle of fresh blood pulsed with dark energy around it. "I have to destroy it," she told herself, steeling her resolve. Outside, Javier took a deep wound to his side, but managed to bring down a cultist who was strangling Mateo. Both men, bloodied and gasping, saw Elena raise an old iron candelabrum. With a guttural cry, Elena hurled the candelabrum at the grimoire. The impact was brutal. A blast of light and shadow erupted through the church, slamming everyone against the walls. The cultists shrieked, their bodies twisting and dissolving into black vapor. Isaac, roaring in rage, vanished in a storm of darkness. When the echoes faded, San Elias fell into deathly silence. The few survivors emerged trembling from their shelters, staring at a town now devastated, scarred by fire and madness. Mateo, Elena, and Javier, exhausted, wounded, embraced in the heart of the ruined church, knowing they had won the battle. But not the war. Though the grimoire had been destroyed, evil had not fully vanished. Something ancient, something hungry had been awakened. San Elias still trembled under its unseen influence. In the days that followed, the trio noticed the atmosphere had not truly improved. Nightmares continued. Shadowy figures flitted at the corners of their vision, and the whispers never stopped, not even in daylight. Elena, more sensitive to the unleashed forces, began to hear a voice calling her from the crumbling church. "There's something we didn't finish," she confessed one night to Mateo. Javier found the answer in a hidden text retrieved from the sacristy. Although the grimoire had been destroyed, the link to the fallen angels remained. To break it completely, they would need to perform a forgotten ritual: the breaking of the vow. The ritual required 3 things: the confession of the traitor, the sacrifice of the bearer, and the light of dawn over a purified altar. "Who's the traitor?" Mateo asked, tense. A long silence followed before Elena looked down. "My family," she whispered. "My blood bears the mark of the cult. I am the traitor." The pain in her voice was unbearable. Mateo and Javier exchanged looks of disbelief and sorrow. The night before the ritual, San Elias felt more dead than ever. The few survivors hid behind locked doors, while a macabre murmur floated in the air like an omen of doom. At the appointed hour, the 3 walked to the ruined church. Javier, his hands shaking, traced a protection circle on the ground, while Mateo held the sacred relic. Elena stood at the center and began her confession. Her words, torn from the depths of her soul, echoed through the crumbling walls. When she finished, the ground quaked, and a deep fissure opened beneath the altar. From it rose amorphous shadows, grotesque figures desperate to stop the ritual. Mateo and Javier fought furiously, using every ounce of faith and knowledge to hold the entities back. With her last strength, Elena raised the relic and slammed it to the floor, shattering it in a burst of blinding light. When the brilliance faded, the shadows were gone. The first ray of sunlight pierced through the shattered ceiling and landed directly on Elena, who knelt, exhausted but alive. The bond had been broken. San Elias, at last, could breathe freely. The sun rose slowly, spilling golden light over the ravaged landscape of San Elias. The fog finally began to lift, revealing crumbled homes, empty streets, and a shattered church that stood like a monument to a forgotten war. Mateo, Elena, and Javier walked through the central plaza. Each step echoed like a heartbeat through the wounded town, a town that had faced darkness and chosen light. Though bruised and broken, they knew their duty had been fulfilled. The few remaining townspeople emerged timidly from their shelters. Their faces held fear, yes, but also hope. The evil had been contained, for now. Javier, leaning on a makeshift cane from his wound, looked at the ruined church with somber eyes. "Everything that was sacred here must be cleansed," he said. "Faith must be reborn, free from the shadows." Mateo stood silently. What he had seen had shattered his skepticism, but it had also renewed his will to protect what he loved. He knew he would never see the world the same way again. Elena, for her part, felt a strange calm. She had faced her inheritance, her fears, and she had chosen the good. Though the scars would never fade, she was free. At the old fountain, where Saint Michael was said to have defeated the demon, the 3 of them stopped. Javier, with trembling hands, placed the broken relic in the water. A soft light rose from beneath the surface, like a silent blessing. "Let's not forget what happened here," Elena whispered. Matteo nodded. "Nor what might happen again if we let our guard down." San Elias began its slow rebirth, but in the deepest shadows of the earth, something still whispered, waiting for another mistake, another act of human arrogance. Because some angels, though fallen, never stop trying to fly. What remains in the mist? Years later, San Elias had changed its face. New generations grew up among the restored ruins, unaware of the darkness that once threatened to consume it. The streets were rebuilt, the church transformed into a local history museum, and the horrors of the past became whispers of the old, believed by few. Matteo, now a man of quiet gaze and solemn presence, became the town's school teacher. He taught children about truth, faith, and the importance of well-founded skepticism. Javier, whose health never fully recovered, became the historian of San Elias, the keeper of secrets shared only with those who earned his trust. Elena, after years of fighting her inner demons, found purpose as the town's silent guardian. Every night, she walked the streets, firm, discreet, always alert, always watching. But on certain nights, when the fog grew thick again, when the wind carried whispers in forgotten tongues, and the shadows seemed far too dark to be just shadows, the old ones remembered. They remembered that not everything can be sealed forever, and that, in the deepest corners of the earth, the fallen angels still dreamed of their return. Epilogue. The fog has lifted, but the memory lingers. Years have passed since the night the grimoire was destroyed and the cult was broken, but peace in San Elias is a fragile thing. Children laugh, bells toll, life returns. But the stones remember. Those who survived carry invisible scars. Matteo teaches truth. Javier guards history. Elena watches the night. The church now stands as a museum, its stained glass windows glowing softly in the sun, a symbol of rebirth. But beneath its foundations lie tunnels no one dares to reopen. And sometimes, when the fog returns and the wind speaks in unfamiliar tongues, the town holds its breath, for the fallen still dream in silence, for the forgotten still whisper beneath the earth, and for those who listen too closely, the shadows will answer.
Thank you for listening. The journey has just begun. Until next time.